Modern dating is a mess. We have situationships, we have hookup culture, like what even is that? And people are reporting being more lonely and unhappy than ever. Why is that? I think no one wants to ask the question of how we got here in the first place. And today we're going to be addressing that and addressing how modern feminism killed and ruined dating. Welcome to the Live It Loud podcast. My name is Maya. I'm a 23-year-old wife and mom. On this podcast, we talk all things culture, politics, faith, motherhood. I'm also an advocate for life. So we've gotten into some pretty deep issues here on the Live It Loud podcast. In the past couple episodes, we've been talking about the sexual revolution and feminism. And today we're going to talk about how modern feminism ruined dating. And I think some framework that we need to lay out before we get into this episode is how modern feminism and the original ideas of feminism are completely different. You might be on the other side of the screen saying, Maya, if it weren't for the original feminists or weren't for feminists, you wouldn't be able to be on this podcast talking about it. Of course, I think that the original feminists were completely necessary, that it was God's work fighting for equality and fighting for equal rights and the right to vote. However, I don't think that modern feminism and the ideas of the original feminists are the same. And if we look at how the ideology of modern feminism has affected our culture today, you can't even deny it. And we're going to talk about how some of those shifts started and what that looked like and how that affected dating culture today. Now, first things first, modern feminism promised that relationships would be better if we added more feminism into our culture. They promised that things would become more equal, that there wouldn't be such a power struggle between men and women. And honestly, if we look at how dating culture is today, it's completely the opposite of those things. Everything that we were promised from the sexual revolution and from modern feminism has been a lie. It has been a lie, and we are paying the price for it. And I have talked to so many people. I got married young. I was 20 when I got married, had my first baby at 22. I've known my husband since we were 15. So thankfully, I wasn't really a part of the dating scene at all when I was younger. And so thankfully, because I met a great man of virtue who loves God and loves Jesus so much when I was young, I got to skip out on some of this horrible dating culture that we're seeing today. But I have heard from many of my friends and other women who have been a part of the dating culture, who maybe are in their 20s and 30s, some even, almost in their 40s, talking about how men are just playing around. Nobody wants to commit, and women are just playing around. Nobody wants to commit to each other anymore. And we got to talk about kind of how that happened and why that happened. And before anyone freaks out, of course, like I said before, this is not to attack women. I love women. I am a woman. I want to question the ideologies that have shaped our culture and promised that things would get better, but in reality have just made things worse. Okay? So something we have to acknowledge first, though, before we get into the dating conversation, is how modern feminism shifted. And in my last episode, we kind of go over this a bit more. But modern feminism shifted from fighting for equality, like the original feminist, to demanding female superiority or demanding sameness between men and women. And if you don't understand the difference there, equality is fighting for equal rights and equal treatment, as in we're fighting against systems that oppress women and making things better for women, for our biological differences to men. Whereas sameness is just demanding that men and women be the same, that we're treated the same, that we act the same, that we are the same. And so, of course, when we erase the gender differences between men and women and don't acknowledge those differences, we also are going to erase the things that celebrate those differences, like chivalry, right? I made a whole TikTok video that went pretty viral about how modern feminism killed chivalry. And that's something we're going to get into today. And a lot of people get upset when I say that. But if we look at how dating culture looks today, you can't even deny it. It is just a reality. And so with modern feminism shifting from equality to sameness, now we have our culture demanding that women act the same as men, that women perform like men, that women suppress our natural bodily function so that we can be sexually free. I say that in quotations, sexually free like men. There's nothing actually free about having sex and sleeping around and not having consequences to that in terms of like not getting pregnant. Obviously, even with birth control and all those things, you can still get STDs. There are still so many consequences. It's just not worth it. Biologically, hookup culture is one of the most toxic things that could have happened to men and women, and how that affects our bodies is actually insane. I was just watching a podcast episode of, oh my gosh, I forget her name. It was a culture apothecary, I think. It was Alex Clark, but she was talking with someone else about how having more than one partners actually increases the risk of cervical cancer for women, because your body and the way your body responds to the male sperm, if you have different men that you're sleeping around with, it actually like weakens your immune system. It's crazy how this science actually works and how hookup culture has been so toxic, not just for women, but for men too. And so that's a whole nother kind of sidebar. But we had this, birth during the sexual revolution and even after that, and we're seeing more of that kind of now. We had this birth of the girl boss. I don't need a man. Men are just an optional accessory to women. If you're dating, your man should just be on a leash and should be kissing your feet, and he should just give, and you should never give anything back. We've turned relationships. Modern feminism has turned a beautiful partnership into a transactional relationship. Nothing about relationships anymore is about giving or serving. It is always about, what can I get from this other person? How can I benefit myself? And so when we erase these differences between men and women, we also erase the gestures that celebrate those differences. And so with that, we see modern feminism kill chivalry. And a lot of people get upset when I say that, but like I said, you can't deny it. Chivalry was never meant to make women look weak. And I think this is where a lot of modern feminists, sorry, I'm just tripping over my words today. I had a coffee, so I'm going at like 1,000,000 miles per hour. I'm actually drinking my 7 Weeks coffee. So if you're watching on YouTube, I have my little 7 Weeks coffee latte. And I'm going to be honest, I made this like 2 hours ago, and I have a kid, so it was a little bit difficult for me to finish this coffee before he went down for his nap. So I'm wired right now drinking this coffee. I actually have a code for this. If you want to get 7 Weeks coffee, it's a pro-life coffee company. My code is just my name, MAYA in all caps, and you can get 10% off your order. The total shameless plug there. But I can't even remember where I was going with that before I got distracted by my coffee. Oh, we were getting into chivalry, okay? Chivalry was never meant to make women look weak. And I feel as if modern feminists portray chivalry as something that is patronizing. And you might say, oh, Maya, that's not really going on right now. That's not really happening. But it's true. If you go on social media and you go online, I've seen so many stories. I watched this video the other day, and in the comment section, it was just men talking about how they don't open the door for women anymore because they had a bad experience with a woman who was like aggressive towards them, or saying like, I don't need you to hold the door, or I have a boyfriend. And like, instead of just saying like, thank you. And so men don't hold the door anymore. Chivalry was never meant to make women look weak. It was meant to cultivate a culture of respect and acknowledge the virtue that women have. Acknowledge the difference, the virtue that women have versus men, because we're different. But feminism paints being a gentleman as something that is patronizing. And so after decades, this is not just overnight that something like this happens. After decades of men being told that women don't need them, that women are better off without them, of course it has shaped this generation of men into not wanting to do polite, chivalrous things to women. Now, this is not solely on feminism. This is also a result of weak men and fathers not for lack of better terms, fathers not having the balls to teach their sons how to respect women, because they also don't respect their wives. And we could get into also the rise of single parent families and all of those kinds of things since the sexual revolution, and how the sexual revolution and the lack of commitment and treating marriage like it's just some social contract has affected women. But that's honestly like a whole separate episode, but I'd love to get into that at some point. But instead of seeing women and men as complementary, this narrative has increasingly framed women and men as opposing forces. And so women don't need men, and men are like, oh, well, I'm not going to date a girl if she's just a gold digger and she's just trying to get stuff from me and want me to buy stuff. We're clashing because of these ideals. So now relationships, they're not viewed as valuable partnerships, but they're viewed as transactional. And so relationships are now not about servitude and sacrifice. It's about everyone wanting the benefits of a relationship while still keeping their freedom and independence. It's like saying that you're swimming in a pool and you just got your toe in the water. Like, you're not actually fully swimming in the pool. You can't actually fully commit to getting in the water or say that you've gotten in the water if your toe's just in the pool. And that's what men and women are doing. We're saying, oh, well, we want this commitment, but we're not willing to actually fully cannonball into the water. We just want to dip our toe in and test the waters. And that's how we have hookup culture and situationships and all of this hot mess that we have going on right now. This is the reality. Relationships require interdependence. And what makes me so mad, okay, this actually makes me so mad, and I'm being a little bit sarcastic when I say this, but also it does actually get me kind of fired up, is that if you post online that you depend on your partner, on your spouse, your husband or your wife, or that you guys work together in any capacity where you're not completely independent, people are like, oh, well, what if they cheat on you and leave you? And what if, they steal all your money and they do all this? It's crazy. Our culture just wants everyone to be hyper independent with the benefits of a relationship. So we have been trained not to depend on one another, but to try to keep our individual freedom. And when we try to do this in relationships, of course, relationships don't work out. And that's why we're seeing divorce rates are super high, because nobody actually wants to sacrifice anything. Nobody actually wants to serve their partner or their spouse. Everything is about what you can do for yourself. So of course, with that mindset, divorce rates are high, hookup culture is high. People who are getting married and having kids is just getting less and less and less every year, because this is what we're being fed through our media, through like the movies and shows, and through our news outlets. People are talking about how relationships are terrible for women, when in reality, they're not. They're amazing. But they're not amazing if you can't fully commit to each other. And so relationships require interdependence. If everyone is trying to prove how, self-sufficient they are, you end up with individuals who are completely selfish and detached. People don't want to be vulnerable. They don't want to sacrifice or depend on someone. So instead of partnerships and real love, we end with low investment relationships viewed as optional accessories instead of meaningful partnerships. And when you push the idea that needing someone is a weakness, it completely changes how men and women interact with each other. People aren't looking for love or real partnerships anymore. They're looking for temporary ways that they can feel better or not be alone. When we as a culture push this idea of hyper independence and we treat marriage like it's just some outdated construct, commitment starts to feel unnecessary. And that's how you end up with hookup culture, situationships, and people who are too afraid to commit because they think that they'll lose their independence. When we as a culture start treating attachment like it's limiting instead of meaningful, sure, you might gain more freedom, but you're not going to gain more fulfillment. You're not. And that's why you hear these beautiful love stories of our grandparents who, maybe back then, obviously I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to romanticize that, because of course, domestic abuse was insane. And like we had older men chasing young women. Like there was some creepy stuff going on then too. But example, like my grandparents, I'll give that example for once. They've been together for, I don't even know, 50 plus years, maybe. I don't know. I sorry, grandma, if it wasn't 50 years, I have no idea. But they've been together for a really long time. And it's not because they were both trying to be independent and do things on their own. It's because they lean on each other and they love each other. My parents have been together for 26-ish years, I think. 26. I think it'll be 26 years this October. They didn't stay together this long because they're both independent and doing their own thing. They stayed together this long because they're not afraid to commit to each other and serve each other and love each other, even in the hard moments. Nobody wants to stick with their partner through the hard moments anymore. And so I think that's something we need to acknowledge, is that as a culture, if we want to see healthy relationship, if you want a healthy relationship, you're going to have to sacrifice something. I didn't end up with my husband, married to him, because I just wanted to be independent and girl boss, do my own thing. Of course, I could have done that, but we probably wouldn't have gotten married so young. But I wanted to be with him, and I was willing to sacrifice being solely independent financially and all of these things to now being with him. And I would not change it for the world. It's so much better living with my best friend. We get to work towards our goals together, encourage each other. But of course, it takes sacrifice. I am my child's primary caregiver. He's almost 1 year old. He needs me. And I have to be there for him, right? We could pay for daycare or do something like that, but that's just something that is a priority to me and my husband, is that one of us is home with him. And I also work, so we have the extra fun money. I say that in quotations, but I like working. It's something that, gives me a little bit extra to do outside of the home, and I like it. I like my job. I'm passionate about my job. And so we take turns taking care of our son, and we both contribute and we both sacrifice. And relationships don't work unless you are willing to sacrifice and put aside yourself sometimes. And nobody is willing to do that anymore. And that's why our modern dating culture is such a disaster. So I'm not solely blaming women, like I said. I'm just blaming this ideology that has turned men and women into opponents instead of partners. Deep down, everyone wants to feel love. Everyone wants to be cared for. Everyone wants to feel needed. But when men and women are constantly told that we don't need each other, that relationships are optional, masculinity is a problem, that, giving birth and having a child is body horror, and all of these things, and how children are a burden, men and women stop rising to the occasion. We stop sacrificing, we stop dreaming, we stop pushing towards his goal of having a family. So sure, a good man or a good woman who genuinely wants to find a spouse will strive to be chivalrous, will strive to be feminine. But when our culture stops valuing relationships and commitment, it shouldn't surprise us that people start treating others that they pursue as disposable instead of meaningful. Relationships aren't about what can I do for the other person now. It's about what can I do to benefit me. And so we're seeing this just selfish culture. Selfish culture has ruined dating, essentially. And that's what modern feminism raised up. Modern feminism raised up this selfish generation of women. And then we see the rise in abortion because nobody wants to be responsible and take accountability. And we see a rise in just divorce rates. We see all these things that we've talked about throughout this podcast episode just rising. And it's horribly sad. I saw this video talking about dates, how dates nowadays are just job interviews that men have to pay for. And, it's true. It's really true. Most people aren't out to find a life partner anymore. They want their man as an accessory. A lot of women want their man as an accessory, and they want them to be like a lapdog that pays for everything. And that's not how relationships work. And men are the same. It's like, it's going both ways. There is so much more that I could say about this topic, but specifically that's what I wanted to cover today, was talking about chivalry and talking about how everyone just wants to be selfish. Nobody wants to be dependent on another person. Nobody wants to be willing to admit that we need each other, that men and women need each other. And God's design for life, for relationships, is the best way to go. If you want balance between men and women, you have to follow God's design. And so, of course, when we stray away from God's design, we see a perverted, corrupt version of that. And we see these, hookup culture, situationships, nobody wants to commit kind of deal going on now. And the only solution to that is, number one, not being selfish, right? We have to decide if we want to be in a relationship, there are going to be things that you have to sacrifice. And number two is reverting back to God's design of men and women, and that we are different. And that's something that we have to acknowledge if we want to be successful and we want the men and women to balance out each other. We have to acknowledge that we're different. We're biologically different because we need each other. There are certain things that men offer that women need, and there are many things that women offer that men need. We need each other, and only when we revert back to God's original design will we see things get better. Will we see divorce rates, begin to lower again? Will we see commitment begin to rise again, and families start to have children more often? And you'll see a lot, even in the church, there's a lot of divorce rates because people don't actually believe this in their heart. People don't believe that marriage is actually a covenant before God. People don't believe that sex is something that is sacred and that should be in marriage anymore. Everyone wants to blur the lines of what's good and what's not good. And so, of course, when we stray away from that, everything's a mess. So all of that to say, trust in the Lord. And if you want to learn more about relationships, open God's Word. God's Word has a lot to say. The Bible has a lot to say about relationships and what that should look like. So anyways, I've been on a whole tangent, but this is how modern feminism ruined chivalry and ruined dating. I hope this episode was insightful to you. This is just my opinion. So thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to hear more of my opinions, definitely subscribe and listen to the rest of the Live It Loud podcast episodes. We've been getting into some really good, deep issues. And go find me on other social media platforms, liveitloudMaya. I am so happy to sit here and talk with you guys today. If you guys are looking to get some coffee, definitely try out 7 Weeks Coffee. I'll drop the link down in the description below. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye.